Have you read an entire paragraph, like understood every single word perfectly, but then you reach the end and realize your brain is just holding a bag of totally disconnected facts?
Oh, yeah, constantly.
Right. You look at the page and your eyes did all the physical work, but you completely missed the actual point. And, if you're studying for your TEAS or HESI entrance exams right now, that exact phenomenon isn't just like a frustrating thing.
Yeah.
It is often the literal difference between passing and failing.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
So today we are doing a deep dive into the mechanics of drawing conclusions. We've got a great stack of sources here, and we're looking at the cognitive psychology of how we read, why highly trained forensic experts sometimes just hallucinate conclusions that aren't there, and how you can use all of this to decode the exact strategies test writers use to trip you up.
I love this topic because, it's a wildly common experience to read something and retain nothing. And it really reveals something fascinating about how human beings process information. We tend to think of drawing conclusions as just this hoop to jump through for a multiple choice test, right?
It's just another reading comprehension skill.
Exactly. But it is actually the absolute core of clinical judgment. It's the fundamental mechanism of how we make sense of a chaotic world. So mastering this for your exam is essentially your first lesson in learning how to think like a working nurse.
I think we should probably start by defining our terms, because people throw the word conclusion around in everyday life to mean like a guess or an opinion.
Or just a gut feeling, yeah.
Right, a gut feeling.
Right.
But our sources are very specific about what this means in a testing environment. A conclusion is a logical judgment that the text itself never states outright. You arrive at it by combining three distinct things.
Right, so that's the explicit information on the page, your own universally shared background knowledge, and then a valid logical leap that bridges the gap between them.
So you have to synthesize all that.
Yeah, think about it as sitting one critical level above simple recall. If a test question asks you to point to a fact directly stated in paragraph 2, your brain is just performing this basic search and retrieval function. Drawing a conclusion requires a totally different cognitive operation.
The academic literature gives a very clean, low-stakes example to illustrate this, which I really liked. Imagine a short passage that just says, Maria packed an umbrella, checked the radar twice, and left the house 40 minutes early.
Okay, so if I'm reading that, I immediately assume Maria expects it to rain. And she's probably worried about traffic or delays, so she wants to avoid being late.
And there it is. You've just successfully drawn a conclusion.
Yeah.
But notice what you didn't do there. You didn't find the word rain in the text.
Right.
You didn't find the word worried or traffic. None of those concepts are physically printed on the page at all.
No, your brain just took the explicit clue.
The umbrella, the radar, the time.
Exactly. Applied your background knowledge of how weather and commuting work and constructed a reality that the author implied but never explicitly wrote down.
Which is wild because, old school educators must have been completely baffled by this. For a long time, the dominant theory was that reading was basically just translating a foreign language, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. Up until the early 20th century, that was the entire consensus. Reading failure was diagnosed strictly as a vocabulary problem.
So if you memorize the dictionary definitions of the words, you automatically understand the meaning of the sentence.
Yeah, they literally thought reading was just a math equation of vocabulary words. If a student couldn't answer questions about a paragraph, teachers just assumed the words were too advanced. But then in 1917, an educational psychologist named Edward L. Thorndike published a paper.
Right. Reading as reasoning.
Yes, and it completely blew up that assumption.
Thorndike is the one who tested the 4th and 6th graders, right?
He is, yeah. He had them read these short paragraphs, and he made a discovery that seems obvious to us now, but it was revolutionary at the time. These kids were reading the words aloud with absolute phonetic perfection. They knew every single definition.
They had perfect decoding skills.
Perfect. But when Thorndike asked them basic comprehension questions about the dynamics between the characters or, the outcome of the events, they fell apart. They couldn't weigh the details against each other.
Why?
They couldn't prioritize which sentence mattered more. Thorndike essentially proved that reading isn't just this passive absorption of words in a sequence. It is a highly active, aggressive process of selecting, weighing, and organizing data in real time.
So he realized that reading is, at its core, an act of reasoning.
Exactly.
So it's basically like being a detective at a crime scene. Just identifying the physical clues isn't enough. You actually have to figure out how they connect to tell a story.
That's a great way to put it.
Which means you can have a flawless mechanical ability to read words and still have zero comprehension of the story itself.
Yeah, and our sources actually trace this exact phenomenon through the decades. Even into the 1990s and 2000s, researchers like Kate Kane and Jane Oakhill were studying this specific population. Kids they categorized as, quote, poor comprehenders who decode perfectly.
So you can pronounce every word right and still miss the point completely. It suggests that the ability to make an inference isn't just a byproduct of knowing big words. It's an entirely separate mental muscle.
It is a completely distinct muscle. And we know that definitively because of a massive statistical study done by Frederick B. Davis back in 1968.
Right, the factor analysis study.
Yes, Davis wanted to figure out if reading comprehension was just one giant general ability or if it was actually a collection of separate micro skills functioning together. So he used factor analysis on thousands of test results to isolate these variables.
So he was looking for patterns to see if a student could be terrible at one specific type of reading task, but great at another, which would prove they use different parts of the brain.
Precisely. And Davis proved mathematically that drawing inferences is an isolatable, measurable cognitive skill. It's totally distinct from finding the main idea or understanding vocabulary in context.
Which is exactly why modern nursing entrance exams like the TEAS and HESI carve out drawing conclusions as its own separate scored category today.
Yeah, they aren't trying to find out if you are a good reader in some vague sense. They are testing the structural integrity of this one specific mental operation.
Well, if we're talking about the structural integrity of the brain while reading, we have to talk about the cognitive shift that happened in the 1970s. The sources highlight researchers Walter Kinch and Toon van Dyke.
Right, the construction integration model.
Yes, they argued that we don't just extract a literal text base, like we don't just memorize the ink on the page, we actively build a situation model. It's like your brain is constructing a 3D diorama of the text's reality as you read it.
I really like that 3D diorama analogy because when you read the words Maria packed an umbrella, you don't just store the letters UMBRELA in your short-term memory, right?
No, of course not.
You instantiate a mental model of a woman, a sky, the thread of water, and an object to block it. You populate that diorama with logical inferences drawn from your own lived experience. Without that active construction, the text remains just a flat, meaningless list of words.
So let's pull this out of the abstract and apply it directly to a clinical vignette you might actually see on the ECSI. Imagine the test gives you a passage describing a patient arriving at the clinic. It says, the patient's lips and fingertips have a bluish tint. He's breathing rapidly and complains of dizziness when he stands.
Okay, so let's look at the diorama you're building there. You have explicit cues. The bluish skin is cyanosis. The rapid breathing is tachypnea. The dizziness upon standing is orthostatic hypotension.
Right, but nowhere in that paragraph does the author explicitly state the patient is experiencing inadequate oxygenation.
No, it doesn't.
But as a nursing student, you are absolutely expected to select inadequate oxygenation as the correct multiple-choice answer. You're taking the physical cues, applying your background knowledge, and making an inferential leap. It's the converging evidence of all three symptoms pointing in the exact same direction.
Converging evidence is really the key phrase there, because no single symptom proves the conclusion definitively on its own. I mean, someone could be breathing rapidly because they just ran up a flight of stairs.
Sure.
Or they could be dizzy from a medication side effect. But when you overlay the blue lips, the rapid breathing, and the dizziness, that overlapping Venn diagram leaves you with only one conclusion that is best supported by the totality of the text.
Okay, hold on. I'm getting a little tripped up by the terminology the sources use versus what test prep books use.
Oh yeah, this is a common issue.
Yeah, because a minute ago we called the Maria example an inference, but now we're calling the oxygenation example a conclusion. The academic literature makes a strict distinction between an inference, which is a tiny local gap fill, like knowing the pronoun he refers to the patient, and a conclusion, which is this big, overarching, cumulative judgment.
Right.
So aren't test writers doing you a disservice by using the terms interchangeably? Because if I'm studying, I need to know if I'm looking for a minor logical bridge or a massive diagnosis.
It is incredibly frustrating for students, yeah. Standardized tests generally collapse those two terms into one single bucket. In academia, a conclusion is the final destination, and inferences are just the stepping stones you use to get there.
Okay.
But a test writer just needs to know if you can see what is unstated. But understanding this academic distinction actually gives you an edge because it calibrates your expectations. When you sit down for the TEAS, some questions will ask you to make a microscopic inference connecting two sentences together. It will feel almost too obvious. But the very next question might ask you to synthesize 3 paragraphs of complex data to identify the author's hidden agenda.
Oh, I see.
If you know the test blends both micro-inferences and macro-conclusions under the same category, you won't panic when the scale of the cognitive leap suddenly changes from question to question.
That makes a ton of sense. But it also brings up a pretty terrifying flip side. We just discussed what a successful, well-supported conclusion looks like. What happens when our brains malfunction and that inferential leap goes too far?
Yeah, that's where it gets scary.
It seems like it's shockingly easy to build a 3D mental diorama that feels incredibly real to you, but has absolutely no basis in the actual evidence provided.
This is the most dangerous trap in human cognition, and it is exactly what these nursing exams are hunting for. Consider the tragic case of Ronald Cotton back in 1984. A college student named Jennifer Thompson survived a horrific assault, and later, she confidently identified Cotton as her attacker from a photo lineup and again in a physical lineup.
Right. He was convicted and served over a decade in prison. But then in 1995, DNA testing completely exonerated him. The actual attacker was a totally different man named Bobby Poole.
Exactly. And the thing is, Thompson wasn't lying. She wasn't committing perjury. Her brain produced a conclusion, an identification, that felt absolutely rock-solid certain to her. She had built a situation model from her trauma and her memory, and the conclusion felt true.
But human memory is reconstructive. It's not a video recording. The evidence in her mind didn't match reality.
Exactly. So a massive takeaway here is that a strongly felt conclusion built from vivid memory is not automatically a well-supported one. Confidence is not evidence.
Confidence is not evidence. That's a great rule. And I know it's easy to just dismiss that as a flaw of human memory under extreme trauma, but our sources point out that highly trained, methodical experts fall into this exact same trap with physical evidence all the time.
They absolutely do. In 2015, the FBI, the Department of Justice, and the Innocence Project actually had to release a joint review regarding decades of forensic hair analysis.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they looked at 268 trials where FBI examiners had testified that a hair found at a crime scene microscopically matched a defendant.
And the findings were catastrophic.
Yeah.
In over 90% of those cases, the FBI examiners gave testimony that vastly overstated the strength of the conclusion that the scientific evidence actually supported.
Right, because the science of microscopic hair comparison can really only say, this hair shares physical characteristics with the defendant's hair, so they cannot be excluded.
Yeah.
Cannot definitively say this is a 100% unique match.
But on the stand, examiner after examiner made the leap from possible association to absolute certainty.
Over and over again.
This perfectly illustrates confirmation bias. It sounds like once an eyewitness or even a highly trained FBI agent gets a feeling about a conclusion, they fall into the trap of only looking for evidence that matches their belief, rather than sticking strictly to what the text or the evidence actually licenses.
That's exactly what happens. The FBI agent likely has other contextual clues. They know the detective suspects the guy has a motive, so they look in the microscope and their brain just wants to close the gap. They hallucinate a level of certainty that simply isn't licensed by the physical evidence on the slide.
Which makes me wonder, when a nursing student is staring down a clinical vignette on a standardized test, how do they stop their own brain from doing the exact same thing?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? To beat the test, you literally have to police your own thoughts. Cognitive psychologists Gracer, Singer, and Trabasso developed a theory in 1994 that perfectly explains how to do this. They divided all inferences into 2 distinct types.
Bridging inferences and elaborative inferences, right? So a bridging inference is kind of what it sounds like, a necessary logical bridge to keep the story from collapsing. Like with Maria. If she checks the radar and then grabs an umbrella, the bridging inference is that the radar is a weather radar, not a police speed trap. The text literally doesn't make sense without that bridge.
Exactly. An elaborative inference, on the other hand, is when you decorate the diorama with your own imagination.
Right.
For instance, assuming Maria is rushing to a highly important job interview because she left 40 minutes early.
But the passage never said a word about her job or where she was going.
But it feels plausible, right? It's a totally reasonable story. And that is exactly how test writers design their wrong answer choices.
Sneaky.
Very. On the TEAS and HESI, elaborative inferences are always traps. The test is looking exclusively for bridging inferences. If your answer choice decorates the story with outside assumptions, it's wrong, no matter how realistic it sounds.
So if FBI agents get tripped up reaching for dramatic, elaborative conclusions, let's run through how a nursing student can spot those exact traps in a multiple-choice lineup. Based on everything we've covered, we can debunk the major misconceptions students bring to test day. First off, a lot of people think the correct answer is just going to be a sentence from the passage, rephrased with synonyms.
Yeah, that's a huge myth. If you can point to the sentence and say, there it is, just worded differently, you are answering a recall question. A true conclusion requires synthesis. It must state a new truth that emerges only when two or more explicit details are combined.
Okay, another massive trap is looking at an answer choice and thinking, well, in the real world, this could totally happen, so it must be valid.
And that's that confirmation bias creeping in. The test writers are deliberately offering you an elaborative inference there. The question you must ask yourself isn't, is this possible? The strict standard is this the best supporting claim based solely on the provided text? If the answer requires you to assume a detail the author didn't provide, you just have to eliminate it.
What about predictions? Because some students think drawing a conclusion means forecasting the logical next step in the story.
Prediction is actually a completely different cognitive skill. A conclusion is a definitive judgment about what is true right now in the present moment of the text based on the evidence already admitted, not what happens next.
Got it. Now, this next one ties directly back to the FBI forensic failures. We are naturally drawn to the most dramatic, definitive-sounding answer choice because it feels authoritative.
Yeah, but extreme language is almost always the fatal flaw in a testing environment. Words like always, never proves, or impossible. On these exams, the conservative, moderate claim is almost always the correct one.
So saying a symptom suggests a condition is a moderate, defensible claim. Saying it proves a condition is an overreach.
Exactly. The test rewards students who respect the limits of the evidence.
And finally, there's the trap of specialized knowledge. Say a student previously worked as an EMT. They read a passage and think, oh, I've seen this exact scenario in the field, here's the advanced protocol we use, and they select an answer based on their resume, not the text.
Which is a fatal error because the exam is measuring your ability to analyze the provided text, not your clinical work history. You are only allowed to use universally shared background knowledge.
So knowing that ice melts when it gets hot is universal.
Right. Knowing the specific pharmacology of a beta blocker when the passage didn't define it, that's specialized. You have to leave the specialized knowledge at the door.
Okay, so when you're staring at 4 multiple-choice answers, you shouldn't ask, could this realistically happen? You have to act like a strict judge in a courtroom and ask, is this the only moderate claim supported strictly by the evidence admitted in this passage?
Acting like a strict judge is the perfect mindset because it really forces you to understand the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning. A lot of students treat reading comprehension like a math problem. They want a deductively airtight answer.
Deductive reasoning is like those ancient philosophy syllogisms, right?
No.
All humans are mortal. Socrates is a human. Therefore, with 100% mathematical certainty, Socrates is mortal.
Yes. But reading comprehension and clinical practice rely on inductive reasoning. You are moving from specific observations, the blue lips, the radar, the umbrella, to a conclusion that is highly probable, but rarely 100% mathematically certain.
You're just looking for the highest degree of probability based on the available cues. You aren't solving an equation, you're weighing a preponderance of evidence.
Exactly.
You know, if you're listening to this right now and you're just trying to get a high enough HANOS SCI score to get into your dream nursing program, you might be wondering why the testing companies are so deeply obsessed with this specific psychological mechanism. Like, why do they care if you can spot an elaborative inference?
They care because it is the defining characteristic of a safe nurse. The National Council of State Boards of Nursing actually uses a framework called the Clinical Judgment Measurement Model, and it shapes the entire NCLEX licensing exam. Step 1 of that model is recognize cues. Step 2 is analyze cues. Step 3 is prioritize hypotheses.
Which is literally just the clinical translation of finding explicit evidence, applying background knowledge, and making the best supported inferential leap.
It's exactly the same thing. When you're working on a med-surg floor, patients don't come with a summary paragraph explaining what's wrong with them. You are gathering scattered data points in real time. A vital sign here, a patient complaint there, a subtle shift in their skin tone.
Right.
You have to draw a supported conclusion about what is happening before the physician has even rounded. If you jump to an elaborative, unsupported conclusion, you initiate the wrong intervention. But if you fail to draw the bridging conclusion that the evidence does support, you might walk out of the room while a patient is actively deteriorating.
Standardized tests catch a lot of flack. But in this specific instance, they are actively screening for the cognitive discipline required to keep people alive. And honestly, this mental discipline scales far beyond nursing. It's the exact same framework you need to process a chaotic news cycle, right?
No, absolutely.
It's how you look at a politician's statistics and figure out what the data actually proves versus the dramatic, extreme conclusion the headline is trying to force you to believe.
Recognizing when a conclusion has outpaced its underlying evidence is practically a modern superpower. It is the ultimate cognitive defense mechanism against misinformation, whether you are reading a patient chart, a forensic report, or just a social media feed.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, tracing the single cognitive skill from Thorndike's classroom in 1917 through the psychological architecture of the 1970s, all the way to the tragic forensic overreaches of the FBI.
Yeah, and the takeaways for your exam are very clear. Just remember that the conclusion will not be explicitly printed on the page. You are searching for the most supported option, not simply a possible one.
Your own feeling of confidence is not evidence.
Right. Always favor the moderate, conservative claim over the extreme one, and rely on the converging details of the whole passage, not just a single isolated clue.
And we'll leave you with something to ponder as you go back to your test prep. Think back to those fluent young readers from 1917 that we talked about earlier.
Yes.
The ones who could read every single syllable aloud with absolute phonetic perfection, yet completely failed to comprehend the meaning of the story. Now project that forward into your own clinical future. Imagine you are standing at the end of a hospital bed. If you can read a medical chart perfectly, checking off every vital sign, every lab value, and every dosage without a single mechanical error, but you fail to see the invisible, unstated story those numbers are telling about your patient, are you actually reading at all?